Charles Bass, USD Senior Director of Alumni Relations, and very happy to have you with us. Today's program is offered by the Alumni Association as part of the annual Hire USD campaign. As a Torero, you're already connected to an extraordinary resource, your fellow USD alumni and current USD students. You already know that Toreros are global citizens and ethical leaders who combine personal and professional achievement with a compassionate and community-oriented approach. We encourage you to think of your fellow Toreros, fellow alumni and current USD students for open positions at your company. For more on Hire USD, visit alumni.sandiego.edu and click on the Benefits tab. Without further ado, I'm thrilled to welcome USD alumnus, recruiting entrepreneur, and founder of TurningPoint Executive Search, Ken Schmitt, from the class of 1992. Ken is a frequent participant in our alumni spotlights, and we really appreciate his willingness to be a part of our programs. Ken has been recruiting for nearly 25 years and launched TurningPoint Executive Search in 2007. The team at TurningPoint continues to reach new heights and has twice been ranked as one of the top 150 fastest growing private companies in San Diego. In 2018, Ken was acknowledged as one of San Diego's most admired CEOs by the San Diego Business Journal. And 1 year later, TurningPoint was acknowledged for being a best company for women. And he just published a book. We'll get to that as well. But for now, Ken, thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks, Charles. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation.
It's always good to see you. And you've been on this before and you've talked about your company before, but for those who might be new, tell us a little bit about TurningPoint Executive Search.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, so as you mentioned in the introduction there, I started the company back in 2007. I've been recruiting now for actually it's almost 26 years, believe it or not. Time is certainly flying by. Got into the industry back in 1998, so it's been quite a while. But yeah, so I started my company, Turning Point. It was a virtual business from day one. At the time, my kids were younger. My wife is a marriage and family therapist, and she was working out of the house in her practice as well. And so we were trying to find a way that we could, if at all possible, have us, take care of the kids versus having a nanny. So I started the company internally, and literally internally in my house, virtually. And we actually never needed an office, never set up an actual official office. And one of the great things about that is that, the reason that I wanted to be virtual from day one has now been a big differentiator for us. And we've now all the folks that are part of the team are the same thing. They have younger kids or adolescents, and they want a flexibility as well. So we use a co-working space for our in-person staff meetings every month, but otherwise we're all working out of our respective home offices. And we work nationally. Our clients are mid-market, primarily clients that are, $10, $15 million in revenue on the low end, up to about $1 billion on the high end. And we specialize in placing sales, marketing, operations, HR, and executive leaders, so presidents and CEOs across the country and across industries.
Great. That's who knew you were a trendsetter back in 1998 or in 2007 when you became starting your virtual thing.
Exactly. Yeah, we definitely saw the pandemic coming, back in 2007.
You should have told us all, but appreciate exactly. That. So, all right, here we are. It's speaking of the pandemic, it's now 2023. We've emerged from lockdowns, at least in California, and life is a little bit different. What are you seeing in terms of job trends, hiring practices, et cetera?
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, the last 3 years have just been a roller coaster ride in terms of hiring. It went from, 2019 minimum wage issues and prices going up a little bit at that point, salaries slightly rising, the war for talent, a lot of things happening. And then of course, 2020 hit, and by March, April of that year, everything had started to shut down. People went into, furloughs and layoffs, and all the pilots and all the, folks that are in the airlines were all asked to go home or take early retirement packages. And then fast forward to the end of 2020, and people said, okay, things are a little bit more reasonable. Let's start to rehire. And then 2021 saw, the great resignation, where everybody said, I realized after COVID that I don't want to work 70 hours a week. And I don't want to, have to travel, 70% of the time. And I like working from home. I want to stay that way. So huge, record number of people that were voluntarily quitting their jobs, ostensibly to go to a different job in 2021. And then we saw more of that in early 2022 last year as well. And then inflation hit, consumer prices hit as well. And companies started to realize, all right, maybe we actually overhired, right? And so now they had to start, kind of downsizing and right-sizing their organizations. And so layoffs began kind of Q3, Q4 last year and have continued over to this year. So those are all things that usually happen over a 10-year period, not a course of 24 months. So everything has been so accelerated. And here we are today where, it's normalizing for sure. We're still, as of this morning's numbers, we still had, 311,000 new jobs created last month. We're at 3.6 unemployment rate. Having this many layoffs while also having that low unemployment is pretty much unprecedented. I was an econ major at USD, and there have been many economists out there that are saying that we have never in the history of our country had these formidable transformative trends happening in such a short period of time. So it's really been very, very interesting time to live through on the human capital side.
Yeah, a little bit of whiplash for all of us too. I think,
yes, right,
especially
right.
recruiters. Maybe let's talk a little bit about some of those trends in terms of do you see more companies doing contract hiring, and are those on the rise, would you say?
That's a good question. Yeah. So, usually in downturns, direct hire, which is hiring for, permanent positions, that tends to slow a little bit. And then contract hire or temp to hire contracts tend to rise because employers are a little bit more hesitant to commit to somebody. And there's usually more people available because of layoffs. And so people that are unemployed, that are in transition, they're more willing to do a temp to perm, role. That's not the case right now quite yet, because it's such this, this paradox right now of some companies that are laying people off and other industries are really seeing a huge shortage of talent. Some companies are laying off in one division, but they're hiring on the other division. So it's really kind of still all over the place. So in talking to and we don't do anything on the contract side. We're all, permanent hiring. We do strategic HR consulting as well, but for the folks I talk to that are colleagues of mine that run other recruiting firms and they're doing mainly contract work, they're saying that they haven't really seen a huge uptick yet on the contract side. Direct hire is still been pretty robust for most of them out there.
Interesting. You mentioned just a minute ago the Great Resignation and folks just deciding to quiet quit or to just quit loudly, I guess.
Right, exactly.
And have you in your dealings with people, have you found folks that did that and are regretting that now?
Definitely. Yeah. There's been a lot of research out there about people that decided to make that change. And, it was a combination of some employers did a very poor job of communicating with their employees during COVID about what their strategy was. I think a lot of employers said, well, we have no good news. Let's just not share anything at all. And so a lot of employees were kept in the dark, and that really created even more of a chasm between the employees and employers. Add on top of that, the fact that a lot of them were remote. So you didn't have that face-to-face interaction that really eroded the trust for sure. So that from that perspective, things have definitely, kind of changed, if you will.
Yeah. Along those lines, company culture, corporate culture, institutional culture is such an important component to work-life balance and happiness in the job. And things are a lot different now. Even here at USD, we talk about there's various remote programs and hybrid work programs. What are you seeing in terms of company culture, and how important do you think that is in 2023?
Yeah, no, that's a good point you bring up. Company culture is so important, and that also feeds into that regret. Your previous question as well. I think a lot of individuals left a job after being there for several years because that lack of communication that I mentioned, or they were underpaid in terms of the market, so they saw a big opportunity to get a 20, in some cases 30 or 40% bump in pay, right? And that sounded great. Now they're realizing that, maybe that wasn't the best move, because yes, I've got more money and a higher paycheck, but now I'm being asked to come into the office every day. Or now, the culture fit, the trust factor is not as great as I thought it was going to be at my new company. So so the culture is really important. And it comes down to communication. I always joke that, I've been married to a therapist for 30 years. So communication is very big in my household personally, but I think it also translates to the business side. right? You've got to communicate with your team what's going on. What do they want to do? Having what we call a career conversation with your team, rather than waiting and having a once a year annual review that everybody hates, right? Employees and employers hate that. Instead, having ongoing, consistent communication so that everybody knows what's going on, and factors and kind of expectations and motivations change both on the employer side and the employee side over the course of the year. So it's really important to keep that communication going so that you cut down on that regret, right? And you cut down on the fact that someone's going to leave their job or quiet quit or whatever term is out there these days, right? So it's really important to keep that communication going to maintain that trust factor between employee and employer.
Yeah. What would you say, or what recommendations would you have for somebody that's I want to figure out what the company culture is at XYZ Corporation. I'm in the running for a job there. How do I learn about the culture?
Yeah, I mean, ideally through the interview process, right? You're asking, really more kind of intangible questions about the organization. How do decisions get made? What kinds of people tend to succeed here? What kinds of folks don't work out here, right? If you're a up and coming $30 million 400 employee company, and you're driving towards your next $50 million threshold, then does it make sense to hire somebody who is a new dad or a new mom, or who's taking care of their elderly parents in their house? If you're expecting them to work 60, 70 hours a week, then probably don't go after that population. And so those are the kind of questions that employees or prospective employees can ask. What is the culture like here? How would you describe it? Asking the hiring manager or the interviewer, what keeps you here? Why did you come here, and why are you still here? Tell me about examples of when you've had an employee that didn't work out. What went wrong, and how can I learn from that to make sure I'm the right fit? And then there are things you can look at. LinkedIn, for example, do a search in LinkedIn. It's obviously an amazing tool, but look at LinkedIn for people that are in your department or the company in LinkedIn, and get a sense for what the average tenures are. Right. If you're a chief marketing officer or VP of marketing, and you look at the marketing folks in that company, and you see, oh, this person was there for 6 months, this is 9 months, this is 1 year, it's probably at least some kind of an indication about what's going on. There's something about the culture that's causing people to leave pretty quickly.
Yeah. How do you recommend somebody, maybe it's just clear communication, talk about work-life balance in the interview process?
Yeah, it's a bit of a delicate subject. Obviously, you don't want to come out and say, "Hey, I'm only willing to work 40 hours a week. Am I a good fit?" Right? But again, asking those questions like, how often are you called in to work in an evening? Or or you can say, I tend to be involved with family activities on the weekends, and will I be expected to be available? Right. Or you could say something like, I'm a night person. So I might be, if you're interviewing for a leadership position, I'm a night person. So I may be typing out emails to my team at night. Is it okay? My plan is always that I don't send them until the next morning. So I do my work in the evening, but I don't set that precedent that my employees expect to have them respond at 11 o'clock at night. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so giving those kind of scenarios and asking whether or not that's consistent with how they operate right now. Also, that's a good way to get a feel for the culture out there.
Okay, makes pretty good sense. All right, yeah. How about some pro tips for alumni who are looking to enter the job market, or maybe make a career pivot as a seasoned professional? I know those are two different areas. Let's talk about alumni just getting into the job market. Tips.
Sure. Yes. So kind of more junior.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think honestly, this response holds true whether you've got 30 years of experience or 2 years of experience. The same thing. It's really about your network, and the higher up you go in terms of your corporate experience, the less likely you are to get a position from an online job posting or even from a search firm like mine as well. For the higher level executives, they have about a 15% chance of getting a position through a search firm. Right. And less than 5%, from an online posting of someplace. And these are folks that are making, salaries of 150 plus, call it that higher level. And so, the odds are they're going to get their next position from somebody in their network, whether it's from USD, whether it's from an internship they had early on in their career, whether it is, a previous company they worked for, or just folks that they know through their network, their community. Those are the connections that'll help get them, that'll drive that next position. And same goes for more junior folks as well. Your network when you're 22 coming out of school is not nearly as robust as somebody who's in their 50s or 60s, obviously. But hopefully during school, during college, and even in high school, you've stayed in touch and you've built up that network a little bit, so you have some place to start. But, talking to professors, I remember when I came out of USD in 92, and I had gotten several interviews. I ended up working for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, but I got a referral to Enterprise through one of my professors, Dr. Alan Jin, who knew folks out there and had helped me to understand that was a good place to kind of start your career. And so I had been applying to jobs also. There, obviously, the internet wasn't around in 92, so it was applying to jobs that I found in the actual newspaper, a little bit different, but same thing. It was about, how do you leverage that network and get out there and talk to people? So going to networking events, again, whether you're junior or more senior, getting involved with trade associations, volunteering at your church or your kid's school, or some a cause that you believe very heavily in. Getting that visibility and that personal branding is really important at all levels of your career, for sure. And that's where your jobs will come from. And I would say that, one of the things I see candidates probably missing the mark on the most is not having a clear, concise message to deliver when somebody says, so Ken, what are you looking for? Right. Many candidates feel like they don't want to close any doors. They're so afraid to close any doors that they try to be all things to all people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I can be a VP of sales, but I'm also happy to be a salesperson. I've worked in companies that are $1 million, but I'm also happy to work at IBM, right? And you can't effectively be all things to all people, because you really end up diluting your brand. So you really got to make sure that you have a crystallized message. Here's where I've offered the biggest value. Here's where I can make the biggest impact on an organization. Here's what I want to learn more about if you're more junior. And here's the kind of culture that I think I would thrive in. Okay. If you grew up in a household that was like me, my dad was a Jack in the Box franchisee and my mom was in real estate. So I gravitate towards the, small to mid-sized companies that are run by family or by a founder also, that are more agile, that are more, make quicker decisions, versus working for a huge organization where things move more slowly. So just knowing yourself is really important from that perspective, definitely. And then you asked about changing industries. It's in good times and bad. It's never easy to change industries, but you can certainly make it easier on yourself. It's going to take a lot of legwork, right? If you've been in banking for the last, 15 years, and the closing down of Silicon Valley Bank today made you realize, God, I got to get out of banking, right? And now you want to go to biotech. That's going to be a pretty tough sell. If you happen to know somebody in biotech, great, go that route, but that's not going to be easy. And you applying to a job, a online job posting at a biotech company, only having 15 years of banking experience, you've got a 0% chance of getting a call back. You really do. So be realistic about what you're going, to and from, and find those similarities and those synergies. And the experience that you have is going to be applicable in the new industry that you're trying to get into. So you don't use too much industry jargon in your previous sector that no one's going to understand. You got to make it more universal to really make it worthwhile for someone to interview you.
Yeah. Good advice. You mentioned 1992 and newspapers and all those things I remember well. Now there's a thing called LinkedIn that you've also mentioned. So talk a little bit about LinkedIn and especially for somebody who might be more seasoned and maybe not as adept technologically. How best should they be leveraging LinkedIn in this day and age?
Yeah, it's an amazing tool. It's so powerful. There's over 1 billion, members now globally in LinkedIn. So I wouldn't say everybody's on there, but a whole heck of a lot of people are on LinkedIn. And so ideally you want to have a robust and diverse network of people. If you're a CFO, ideally you're not just connected to other CFOs, but you also know people that are in operations or that are in sales or marketing or IT or what have you, because the more diverse your network is, the more effective it's going to be for you longer term. right? So that's one thing. Secondly, as you are trying to figure out what kind of company you want to work for, you want to be connecting with people, inviting people into your network that are in those industries, that are in those organizations. And you don't want to go to them and say, I'm looking for a job, let's connect, right? That's the fastest way to turn somebody off. But instead you want to say, hey, we both went to USD, or I see you also started your career at IBM or at J&J or wherever. I'd love to reconnect and chat with you about what you've seen in your career over these last number of years. I'm trying to break into this new industry. I'd love to get your insights and pick your brain. People like to talk about themselves. It's just human nature. But you've got to do it in a way where it's going to add some value to them, where they're going to appreciate it, and don't ask for 2 hours of their time. I find that the most effective messages that I send out, where I get a biggest response, is I'll say, I would love to get your insights on this or that, and I'll mention whatever the topic happens to be. I'd like to set up a 15-minute call. Right. So it's a reasonable and realistic chunk of time. And we may actually talk for 30 minutes. In most cases we do, but at least I'm only asking them for 15 minutes. And then, that it gives them, it's more respectful of their time also. I would say, one of the questions you didn't ask this, but, everybody's got a default mode of communication right now. Some people, it's still the phone, others, it's still a coffee meeting in person, and others it's Zoom. Right. So you've got to make sure when you say a 15-minute conversation, be clear about that. And I would say if it's someone that you have not spoken to before and you're reaching out through LinkedIn, offer a phone call, start with that. And you can always, kind of migrate that to a Zoom call if appropriate.
I think,
but as far as the tool itself goes, I mean, you want to use it as a great research tool. It tells you, who's out there. It tells you what companies are hiring. It tells you information about each organization as well. You can slice and dice the LinkedIn network in a gazillion different ways to find the right kind of people out there. And, for those folks that are not as tech savvy, if you will, it's really not that difficult, right? You think about it as if you've been around for a while, think about it as your electronic Rolodex. That's all it really is. But instead of, kind of scrolling through the old Rolodexes that we all used to have, at least you and I had back in the day, instead of that, you're now clicking, you're looking in LinkedIn through that Rolodex, and you want to have notes about people. You want to, have a spreadsheet or whatever your form of tracking happens to be, but, really understand why you're reaching out to somebody, make sure you're adding value to them also. And don't ask them for a job, ask them for insights, ask them for intel. That's a much better way to endear yourself to them.
Yeah, that's really good advice. It's worked for me personally when I've reached out it doesn't happen all the time, but I did reach out for somebody for advice, and he said he didn't have any advice, but he had a job. So
wow, there you go.
that worked out well. But I think, and it's interesting. I talk to people all over the country, all over the world, and if we're talking in person, one of them will often pull out the phone, and I'll mention somebody. Oh, do you know Ken Schmitt? And they'll pull up LinkedIn,
right? Exactly,
and see if they know you that way, or if you're connected in some way. So it is.
Yeah, it's a very user-friendly mobile app as well. Yeah, and that's a really good point you bring up.
Yeah. Well, speaking of hiring and looking for jobs, what are the trends you're seeing in terms of industries that are hiring you? I know that's a pretty loaded question, but you had to expect it. So who's going to hire the people watching us right now?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a strange time. I mean, in previous times that were similar to this in terms of just kind of, let's say, high inflation and layoffs happening, you would have one answer. But right now it's really a mixed bag. I mean, if you look at the job report from this morning, right, there's still fewer jobs out there, or fewer employees out there right now in hospitality, restaurant services than there were in 2019 pre-COVID. Right, there's kind of this bifurcation happening between product and service companies, and jobs obviously goes along with that as well. So it depends upon what you're talking about. But that being said, there's still a lot of technology companies that are hiring. We've got 8 active searches right now. One is a small company out of the Southeast. It's in technology MSP space. We're doing a search for 2 high-level salespeople there. We've got a search for Kia, the big automotive company, on the operations side up in Orange County. We've got a search for a VP of sales in an education tech company based here in San Diego. We've got, so it's really kind of all over the place. We've got one in the kind of financial services, if you will, turnaround and workout space. So it's really everywhere. I can't say there's any one sector that is definitely not hiring right now. There's a lot happening in crypto, a lot in cyber, obviously a lot of chatter out there, no pun intended, about Chat GPT and AI. What's going to happen with that? Is it going to be as transformative as everybody is saying? We'll see, right? At the beginning of any major trend, people just make these, prognostications that are going to say the whole world's going to end. Every employee is going to be out of a job and robots and AI are going to take over everything. That hasn't happened yet, right? Could it happen at some point? Sure. But I don't know that Chat GPT is going to be the sole driver behind that. And I think even companies that are seeing some of their jobs displaced by AI or by robots, what you find in a lot of situations is that those employees are being upskilled or retrained in other areas, right? I mean, so you need somebody to be able to spot the trouble or the issues or customer service. So when something gets elevated to a human being, someone's got to be there to take that call that the AI can't handle, right? So there's a lot happening out there for sure.
Yeah.
Is that very? I mean, it's an open-ended question, and I probably gave you a very open-ended answer, I realize. But there are a lot of companies that are hiring. Don't let the headlines, mislead you to thinking that, oh God, no one's hiring out there. I mean, unemployment is still 3.6%. It's at a 50+ year high. Low, right? There's still 11 million, almost 12 million open job postings out there, almost 2 postings for every unemployed person. Right. So these are still very, very strong numbers. There's still a lot of hiring that's going on out there. It just takes a little more, a little more, pounding the pavement, so to speak, or outreach, if you will, to find the right ones for you.
Yeah. Well, along those lines, what are some, in addition to LinkedIn, what are some other tools that you might recommend folks use that are maybe new to them in 2023?
Oh gosh, that's a good question. I mean, we
do
use.
You read the Wall Street Journal? Do you follow certain newspapers, or there are certain?
Yeah, definitely.
Industry specific too, I suppose.
Yeah, and there's so many different daily digest emails that come out that give you insight what's going on. I follow Smart Brief, which is really, really strong, and you can subscribe to a whole host of different subtopics: HR, leadership, technology, whatever it is. But Smart Brief is really good. I'm a big believer in the business journals also in every city, because they tend to have at least a general pulse on what's going on in that particular community, and it talks about companies that are growing, that are coming into town, that are expanding, that are adding real estate, whatever it might be. That's also a good tool. And I know, like the book of lists is published every year by the Orange County, LA, San Diego business journals, and I think most cities have that as well, which again is a really good research tool to find the top 50 or 100 companies in any given category in that book of lists. So that's also really good. And I think just, being up on your industry, whatever sector you are targeting, there's a gazillion, I guarantee, different publications, digital or otherwise, that are out there talking about what's happening, the latest trends. So you've got to follow those, and you've got to look at it in terms of, okay, so I'm seeing ABC companies talking about this trend out there. Maybe ABC company needs someone like me to help them tackle that trend, right? So don't just read it in terms of being informed, but also how does that translate potentially into a new position, right? Or a retooling or reskilling of people that they already have out there. So really stay up to date on those things also, whatever you're reading.
Yeah, maybe you can answer the question for them that they haven't even asked yet. So,
right.
All right, well, let's talk about segues. You mentioned the book of lists. Let's talk about books, and your book, which is called The Practical Optimist: An Entrepreneurial Journey Through Life's Turning Points.
Yes, thank you. Great segue, by the way.
Your book.
Yeah, so I've just been recruiting for 26 years and being a business owner for 16 years. There's just a lot of lessons learned that I've had along the way, right? I chose that title because I get the practical side from my mom. Like I said, she was in real estate and accounting before that. Just, a very, very a brilliant woman, very intellectual, always looked at the upside and the downside of things before making a decision. My dad is more the optimistic side, kind of the visionary, someone that has a little bit higher risk tolerance level, right? And so the blend of those two things makes me what I call a practical optimist, right? That's kind of where the title comes from. And that's, to your question earlier, that's kind of my personal brand. And that I think helps dictate the kind of organization that I work for, in this case, my own, but also the kind of culture that I'm looking to build is a blend of that practical optimism. And so the book is taken from the experience that I've had in my career, different jobs that I've had, companies that I've done well at, companies I've been fired from, the launch of my own business. And, there's a chapter in there about the importance of having a very diverse team, right? A company and team that's very diverse. The importance of having values, of how it's not only okay, but it's actually expected that you show up as a human being to work these days. You're not just a number on a spreadsheet like it was back in the GE Jack Welch days of the 80s and early 90s. So things like that are really important. So we talk about all those components in the book. And I'm a very big movie buff. I own, close to 700 DVDs. So I love movies. So, the book also references different movies in terms of representing different experiences that I've had in my life also. And the goal is to really help people, whether you want to own a business of your own or not, it doesn't really matter. But as just kind of the master of your own career destiny, right? What do you want to do in your career? Don't let your career happen to you, but really be the driver and be proactive behind that career, trying to figure out where you can make the biggest impact, where you thrive, and the kind of culture that you want to work for. So the book really talks about that.
The practical optimist and the entrepreneurial journey through life's turning points. Currently has 5 stars on Amazon.com. I don't know if you put all those stars in yourself. I doubt it.
No, I did not.
Good.
They are actual legit readers of the book. Yes, definitely.
Yes, I don't doubt it. I'm going to be one of them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. By the way, just a reminder to use the Q&A feature. If you have questions for Ken, we're going to jump to some of the questions we have right now that we received in the registration process. If that works for you, Ken.
I saw a couple of questions there already. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's ask this one. Talking about the challenges, we mentioned work-life balance, but how do you go through the challenges of you've got kids at home and you're trying to find a job and there's all kinds of chaos in your life. Any advice for somebody dealing with that?
As far as the process of a job search in general?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, it's like when you're working, you have to have that focused time, right? You've got to have a goal. I always talk about how, no matter what your function, your expertise happens to be, job search should be a kind of exercise in project management, right? So if you're a project manager or you're project managing something in your role, then you have a timeline, you have deliverables, you have a budget, right? You've got specific KPIs or OKRs, whatever acronym you want to use in terms of, what your activities are going to be. You have all that in place. Well, it's the same thing for your job search, right? Now, the timeline is always as soon as possible, but be realistic, right? The more senior you are, the longer it's going to take. Typically somebody at that 150, 200K plus, level and compensation, it's going to take anywhere from 4 to 6 months on average to find a new position, depending on different factors, but that's the average, right? If you're earlier in your career, it's probably going to go a little bit quicker, depending upon how flexible you might be, right? So make sure you have that project management mindset and you're setting goals for yourself, activities. Don't just spend an hour here, an hour there. If you can, try to carve out time, where the kids will be taken care of for a 2-hour or 3-hour period, and you can really dive deep into your job search and really, again, have those key activities already lined up before you jump into it, for sure. But it takes time. You don't want to spend 40 hours a week on job search. That'll drive you crazy. But it should be, if you're not working, it should be a 25 to 30 hour a week, quote unquote, job, if you will. If you are working and you're looking to make a change, it's going to vary greatly depending upon what your bandwidth is.
Sure. Yeah. Treat the job search as a job, but maybe a part-time job.
Right. Yeah. I saw the question about from Christopher about when does persistence become an annoyance? Which is it's a really, really good question. I get that question a lot. And it kind of depends upon the organization, right? So let's say you already interviewed, right? And now you're waiting for feedback. Following up a week later is fine. That's not a problem, right? And in that week, you will have hopefully sent an email, follow-up. And I'm a huge believer, even in 2023, I'm still a huge believer in handwritten thank you notes, Nobody does it. You've
Love
got to
it.
do it. It'll make you stand out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
So do that. Yeah.
I just sent a note to somebody today about his persistence. He's
Yeah.
trying for some jobs here at USD, and I don't know if we're slower than other places, but it is a slow process here.
Right.
So
Sure.
yeah. I think, and you can kind of tell if you're becoming annoying.
You can. Yeah. No, exactly right. Back to that culture. Yeah. So if you a week after you first interview, you follow up, and then a week after that again, that's great. If you get nothing in those first 2 weeks, then I would wait probably another 2 weeks and give it some time. Yeah, you don't want to do it every day, more than once in the same week. That's where it does become an annoyance, not a persistence. So be careful with that. But once a week is definitely fine.
Yeah, the hiring person's probably very busy.
Right.
And yours
exactly.
that.
And ideally, you want to say, let's say you're following up, let's say it's your second or third follow-up, and you want to, rather than just saying, hey, have you heard anything or any changes, or I'm still available, I saw this article about your industry, would love to get your thoughts on this. Or, hey, I saw this trend happening, or what have you, or I went to a trade conference or an event. Here's what I found. Find some other way to add value while you're also following up, rather than just saying, hey, do I have the job or not?
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, for Christopher's second question about how do you reach out to somebody from USD, we strongly recommend using LinkedIn for that. And again, asking for 15 minutes or time for a cup of coffee or something like that. And not necessarily asking for a job, as you said earlier,
right,
but asking for advice or tell about their experiences. Right.
Right. Yep.
Great. Do you want to answer Mary's question? One challenge for her, a more experienced worker, is having trouble finding supervisory references because they have all transitioned to retirement. Any suggestion about who would be quality references?
Yeah, I guess I said I have two answers. I would say, Mary, that, first off, somebody who's now retired, they can still speak to how you were when you worked for them. Right. That's not going to change. That part of the equation is still going to be relevant from that perspective. If you can, kind of complement that kind of reference with maybe a vendor or a peer or a client that you work on the outside that can corroborate, again, kind of your work ethic, how organized you are, your leadership skills, those kinds of things, that should suffice to work. As a recruiter, if I got that, that would be fine for me to check the references. So I wouldn't let that be a deterrent to you, and don't discount the value that a retired person still has to bring to the table. And then you can always have the subordinate side. So you can have somebody that previously, reported up to you, can be a reference, because they're going to be able to speak to you as a leader.
Excellent. A couple other questions we have. This, I guess, pertains, it's different for each industry, but have response times for interviews changed since the pandemic started? And how do remote jobs compare to on-site in the way of benefits and salaries? Again, I think that's probably industry specific, but
it's two very different questions. So as far as remote, hybrid, and then fully in office roles, I haven't really seen much of a difference I've seen no difference as far as benefits goes, right? There's still a discussion out there, on a national basis about whether or not, if you're based in Silicon Valley, for example, and you're hiring, a software engineer, but you're open to the person being based anywhere, and do you pay them the Nashville or the Salt Lake City salary, or do you pay them what they would get if they were in Silicon Valley? That's still an open debate. The consensus tends to be you pay them what the job is worth, no matter where they happen to live. If it's going to cost you $200,000 to find, a director of IT, and you happen to be based in Silicon Valley, you're going to have to pay $200,000 to somebody in Nashville, in Buffalo, in Chicago. I don't care. That's the value of that job, right? So from a salary perspective, it's still based on value, and benefits, I haven't seen any difference. There are some companies that will trade off working from home with compensation. That's a flexibility factor. I'm not a big believer in that personally, but I have seen that, certainly out there. It's not unheard of by any stretch. But then you got to figure out, okay, so what's the trade-off there? What are you going to gain and or lose if you're working 100% remote also? What was the first part of that question? It was,
I guess, how have response times for interviews changed? Pertains to that persistence and annoyance
Yeah, I
question.
know. That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't really seen any examples of response time changing. I would say that it's taking a little bit longer for companies to fill positions because, again, the economy is still a question mark. Is it going to be a soft landing, a hard landing, no landing? How many more interest rate hikes are there going to be? All these different questions out there. So some CEOs are a little more hesitant to commit to making that hire, but it hasn't been a dramatic change. Again, for jobs, especially that are high impact, that are, tough to fill, there's still a pretty high sense of urgency. And so that timeline for that interview process is still pretty quick.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you figure out what your passion is? That's a
good question. Yeah, so
question.
I had this exercise that it's taken from a movie, also from the movie Parenthood, with Steve Martin back in the day. But I have people, I say people should make a list of the get tos and the have tos, right? What are the things that you get to do in your job? What are the things that you really enjoy, that you gravitate towards, that you get up in the morning and think, oh, good, I get to do X, Y, Z. What are those things, right? And then next that you want to make, and it could be people related, it could be technology related, it could be, are you traveling? Are you not? Are you at home? Are you in an office? All those factors are on the get to side. Then there's the have to side. What are the things that you have to do as part of your job, right? There's no escaping them. You have to do them. So then that helps you figure out, where is your passion? What kind of a job do you gravitate towards? What kind of a job should you apply for? When you're doing an informational interview, what kinds of potential positions should you be talking about, right? That get to and have to really goes a long way to help you figure out where your passion truly is. And just, you have to be really honest with yourself. And you can't just say, well, I'm okay doing this, right? If that's how your sentence is starting, that should probably go on the have to, side of the ledger. Whereas the things that come to mind right away are probably the things that you really are excited about.
Got it.
Yeah.
Here's a question from Maya. What are the biggest mistakes you see job seekers have on their resume or LinkedIn profile?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the challenge with LinkedIn is that you only have one version, right? Whereas with your resume, you should be, customizing your resume for each job that you're applying to. LinkedIn, you can't do that. So I think too many people paint themselves into a corner, right? Where they're pigeonholed because they've gotten so specific and so nuanced on their LinkedIn profile that unless they're applying to a job within that very small space, then nothing else applies. So you've got to make your LinkedIn profile more universal. You can certainly include some industry jargon, but make sure that you're also translating that for somebody who might be coming from a different industry, especially if you're trying to deliberately change sectors, without question. I would say LinkedIn profiles sometimes are too short, right? You don't want to have, 15 bullet points for every position, but you don't want to have just one either. You want to have between about 4 and 8 bullet points. That's the ideal range for each position that you have there. But again, because you're trying to, your LinkedIn profile is really kind of your preemptive resume, right? When I find you as a search consultant, as a hiring manager, I'm going to look at your LinkedIn profile. And if it doesn't spark my interest right off the bat, then I'm going to move on to somebody else. So make sure that you are customizing your headline, which is the information right below your actual name, right? You can customize that very easily. You have 160 or so characters there. And don't use generic terms like, great leader or professional or consultant. You want to be more specific, public company, technology, IT leader, right? Those kinds of things that are very clear as a banner, kind of describing who you are. Mistakes on your resume, most often it's too long, right? Sometimes too short, but usually the mistake I see is somebody's got a 3 or 4 page resume, and that's way too long. No one's going to read that much. If you're applying for a job where publications and patents are important, that's one thing. You might have a whole page dedicated to that. But barring that kind of a position, it really should be 2 pages. Right. And you don't want to give the same amount of real estate on your resume to a job from 20 years ago that you do to your job that you have today. You really want to minimize and de-emphasize, your roles from 20 years ago. You don't have to leave them off completely, but just have the name, your title, and maybe one very, very short single sentence, single line description, and that's it. Whereas your most recent position should definitely have much more detail.
Okay. Can I also say, I strongly advocate for a cover letter because the resume just doesn't necessarily give context always about why this position is important to you. I don't know if you would agree with that.
Yeah, so it depends on the industry, right? In education, academia, in nonprofits, cover letters are more common, right? In the broad marketplace, fewer than 10% of cover letters ever get read.
Okay.
Right. So I'm not saying don't do one, but don't spend hours and hours trying to perfect it, because the odds are it's probably not going to be read. And these days, your email, honestly, your email introduction, what have you, and your LinkedIn profile, that's really more of a cover letter than anything else. And
right.
if you are somebody who currently lives in San Diego and you're targeting, Miami or New York City or Chicago, whatever, make sure that's on your resume, especially if you're applying to a job in those cities, and have it on your LinkedIn profile also. If you're really truly committed to moving to those places, make it front and center. And another thing comes to mind also, I talked to a very senior executive last week who has an amazing background. It turns out she actually is also a black belt in Six Sigma, which is a very, very hard certification to get, right? And she had a 3-page resume, so we talked about it being too long, but it was the very, very last line of her 3-page resume where it said, black belt, Six Sigma. And so I went back to her and I said, this is really important. This is a key differentiator for you. And you can't bury that someplace at the very, very end of a resume. I'm never going to read anyway. So that should be in the very, very top. So whatever's going to make you a unique candidate and truly differentiate you, speaking multiple languages, having lived around the world, being certified in whatever it is, Six Sigma or anything else, that needs to be front and center in your LinkedIn profile and also on your resume.
Excellent. We've got a few more questions to get to.
Sure.
For those looking to make a career change, what advice would you give when you have recruiters or HR managers start stating you're overqualified for the roles you're applying for?
Yeah, that's pretty common. Unfortunately, I wish I could say it didn't exist. It's pretty common out there, unfortunately. And I'd say you've got to make it clear in some form or fashion why you're still qualified and why you're still interested. Right. They might think, you're overqualified means you're too expensive. That's translating that, into you're too expensive. Or they might think that, yeah, you've been a very senior leader for the last 20 years, 25 years. You're not really going to be very happy in this non-leadership position. So it's incumbent upon you to explain why you are still interested, why you're still a good fit, and that you bring a lot of experience and wisdom and knowledge to the table, and you're not trying to climb the corporate ladder. You're not looking to get into that CEO role, or you're looking for a little bit better balance. You were a CEO before, and that was great, but you're working 70 hours a week. And now you want to work 50 hours a week, and that's tough to do as a CEO. So you're happy to be a strong number 2 or number 3. So in any case, you gotta demonstrate and communicate, right, the fact that there's a reason why you're even interested in this position, and it's beyond money, it's beyond prestige or title. It's that you want to continue to contribute, and you've got a lot to bring to the table.
Yeah. So you feel it's okay to come back in response to that?
Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
Excellent.
Yep. And asking the right questions, and knowing the company well enough to know what they value as an organization, and marrying that up to the value that you bring to the organization yourself.
Yeah. Along those lines, we did receive a question in the registration. What job opportunities are available for alumni over 65 who have an MBA and a JD in today's marketplace? I mean, that obviously there's a wide range of jobs, but what job searching advice would you recommend for somebody who might be 65 or so?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really broad question. I guess I would just say be open-minded. I say this to companies also in terms of the definition of quote unquote an employee. Be open to being a consultant. Be open to working for a consulting firm. Be open to a completely different title or different industry as well that might open you up for more opportunities as well. There's a lot of great candidates that we work with on a regular basis that are in their 60s and even early 70s. So while ageism is certainly out there, unfortunately, again, it's incumbent upon you to make sure that you are demonstrating the value that you bring to the table. It's not going to work every time. I'm not saying I'm not being Pollyanna here, but at the same time, you have to work hard to articulate the value that you're bringing, and be creative and say, you know what, let me work for you for 90 days as a consultant. I want to showcase what I can bring to the table, some ideas that I have for your organization that might help, streamline operations. And let me show you what I can do. And if it doesn't work out, great. If it does work out, we can talk about, permanent employment at the end of 90 days. So find ways to be creative and show your flexibility and your willingness to do what it takes to get your foot in the door.
Excellent. Here's a relatively easy question. Should interests be included in a resume?
Yeah, that's a good question. So my quick answer is no, right? And it depends upon where you're applying, right? Overseas, a CV includes your picture, it includes your family status, it includes your health status, whether or not you have kids. I mean, that's all if you're overseas, obviously. If you're in the US, those are all, no-nos. Don't do that here. But again, your LinkedIn profile, you should have your interests there in your summary section. Like for me, like I said, I'm a big movie buff, right? I'm an amateur, banjo player. I love the beach. I like to travel, whatever it might be. So that's okay to put on your LinkedIn profile. And chances are, most hiring managers and recruiters are going to look at that as well. But don't put it on your resume. It really isn't relevant unless you are applying to a company that is very focused around a certain lifestyle. So if you're applying to an active sports lifestyle, sporting company, and you happen to be a triathlete, or you're part of, Surf San Diego, whatever it might be, then maybe, right? But that should probably go into your email that you're sending to them, and it should be on your LinkedIn profile more so than your resume. But that's a very, very specific scenario.
Okay.
Yeah.
The last question on the Q&A here: what innovative tactics have you seen companies use to increase employee retention and morale?
Yeah, great question. So I think a lot of it, I don't know how innovative it is, but as I mentioned a little while ago, it's about, effective communication, right? Are you staying in touch with your employees? Are you genuinely, concerned with what's going on with them? Do you know what they're all about? What's going to motivate them? Don't paint all your employees with the same brush, right? They're the obvious things about, you get to be flexible with your hours. You can be hybrid, or you can be 100% remote. That's obviously a big retention piece these days. But more than that, it's really the communication. It's, what are your career aspirations? Where do you want to go from here? How can I help cross-train you? What else do you want to learn? Those are the things that employees really want to know about, and they want to know that that they are actually making an impact. If you're at IBM and you're, a staff accountant, how is your job really impacting this 120, 150,000 employee company, right? You need to be able to communicate that effectively to your team so they understand why they're doing what they're doing. And that's the way to retain them. I mean, even someone that gets an offer to get a 10 or 15% raise somewhere else, if they feel engaged and heard and appreciated at their current company, the chances are pretty slim they're going to change jobs for a 10% raise if they feel like they're truly part of the organization. So that's I wouldn't say it's a free, way to do it, but because you have your time is money, obviously, but it's a much less expensive and more endearing, more genuine way to really, build that rapport and retention with your employees.
Authenticity is good too.
Right, exactly. And I think the question also said innovative ways. Even companies there's a great book that I read called Remote Leadership, and it talks a lot about the new paradigm of leaders and what they're like today versus what they were like again back in Jack Welch's days. And there are ways to be a very effective remote leader, if you will. Some companies are doing things like they'll have a quote unquote free lunch, and they'll send out lunch tickets for DoorDash or coupons for all their employees, for example. Or during the pandemic, companies were doing kind of a happy hour, but they were sending out small little mixology kits to all of their employees, right? And there was a big Zoom meeting where everybody together was mixing a specific drink, right? So there are certainly innovative ways that you can bring people together, whether you're in person or otherwise. But it really comes down to communication. I think that's probably the biggest thing that most folks have taken away from the pandemic, is that, wow, when we couldn't talk to anybody face to face, when we were stuck in our homes, that really reminded us of how important it is to have that face-to-face interaction, that human connection. So you as an employer providing that human connection is invaluable. It goes a very, very long way.
That is fantastic. And to find you, people go to turningpointexecsearch.com.
Yes,
Correct?
yeah, and we have the book, and we also launched a podcast as well in January. So we release a new episode every 2 months. I'm sorry, every 2 weeks. Excuse me, every 2 weeks. Same title, The Practical Optimist. It's on Apple and Pandora and Spotify and every place out there. But you can actually see what's going on with leaders right now out there in the marketplace and things that they're doing to be innovative with their own teams. So the podcast is a really good way to kind of see that in real time. And of course, I'm on LinkedIn.
Are you? Yes.
Shocker.
Well, it's so good to hear your expertise again. Kara has put in the chat a link to your book and the podcast.
Thank you.
Ken, thanks so much for your time and for sharing your expertise.
Happy to be here. Hoping I was helpful.
And,
thanks, everybody.
Well, we appreciate you. The pride of the class of 1992, Ken Schmitt. Also, thanks to Kara Marsh-Prophet, who has helped us behind the scenes here. You can see some upcoming events, and also for more information on additional programs and upcoming events, check out our website, including higher USD information. And our website is alumni.sandiego.edu. A couple of upcoming events will be at the theater this Saturday, Honolulu next week, Washington, D.C. Join us at Fowler Park, cheer on the Torero baseball team. We have another, for those of you interested, how to stand out in a job interview is another virtual program. Lots of things on our YouTube channel and plenty of fun things. Thanks again to Ken Schmitt, to Kara Marsh-Prophet, and to all of you for joining us today. And go Toreros.